Cheers, that was brilliant. First off, thank you for writing this for you and me. We wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. I was doing some work with in the British Music Collection, going through some of the archive, and we're going to have a few boxes, and somebody, a woman called Georgie said, "Oh, Julian, you live in Epsom Bridge, have you seen this?" And was gobsmacked, just like, I thought, I'm really familiar with your output and stuff, never seen it before.
Yeah.
And just had this sort of immediate reaction of requires performing. Somehow to do this. And to things like the cover of the score has a photo of the buttress, which is just at the side of it.
Yeah.
And when we were making use of the handmade parade on Sunday to rehearse sort of surreptitiously, because it's quite a visual spectacle as well, and it's sort of there was so much going on with the handmade parade that we kind of moved around.
Yes.
And as one of the sites we were walking to, we went up the buttress, and all the musicians who were performing just went a bit weird for a moment, because they all suddenly went, "This is it, isn't it? This is the spot." And we recreated the photo on the cover, because we stood there with the score on it. Where is it? Yes, I hear. Right. So yeah, thank you for this. It's a wonderful piece. It's something that came out from the things that you're saying, and something that I thought I recognised from your practice, and I think you brought this out. In many ways, you tread a very interesting line as a composer. You're talking about experimental music and the electroacoustic tradition, and you have managed to tread a fine line where you are never belonging to either camp, yet you are a very distinct part of both. And there is a certain very distinctive almost brand of English surrealism and humour that runs through your work that I think is hugely appealing, and this idea of not intentionally alienating an audience, and the kind of entry-level stuff. Whether consciously or not, you're certainly doing this. This has turned into a statement rather than a question. I'm not going to ask you whether this is intentional or not, because I guess because it doesn't really matter, because it's there.
Well, it sort of is intentional. I don't see the point in putting people off. But on the other hand, there's a very difficult discussion in music between what good music is. Is good music music that lots of people like, or is good music music that professional musicians admire? And you can go too far in one direction. So I feel that in the 60s, serious music went too far in that direction. This very abstract, very mathematically conceived music, which was actually very, very interesting if you happen to know about these things and had an extremely good ear and were familiar with all that. But for most people, it's just, what's that? Is it music? But on the other hand, if you go into music thinking, now, how can I make the thing that will sell the most? You end up writing the Teletubbies Christmas song, which you make vast amounts of money, and a week after Christmas, everyone's forgotten it. So there's some balance between those two things. I'm interested in making pieces that I know this is pretentious, this is my aim, that people will still listen to in 200 years' time. But that means anything that's topical tends to fall away. Because in 200 years' time, what was exciting about the politics of this moment will disappear. And all that will be left is everything else. So everything else has to work. But that doesn't stop it being topical now. But you have to realise that, so this piece I've played now with the person talking, the whole set of people telling stories in the abstract in the music. When I play it in the northeast, of course, it's very telling because people relate to it. If I play it in Mexico City, which where the second performance was, no one understands anything, but it still has to work. So that for me, there are always these different levels in music. There has to be at some level in which you think, oh, that's interesting, or that's really horrible. Did that really happen? Not. You just go past it. There's something about it that grabs you. But then when you listen to it for the 20th time, there's still got to be something that interests you about it. Not that you're just at a party and you have your favourite record. It's not quite the same thing. Because if it goes too far one way or too far the other way, it doesn't work.
Yes. So there seems to be a thread that runs from experimental music and say American composers, sort of Rizeki, again Robert Ashley as well. There's the sort of political element that carries through from there.
Yeah.
That seemed very evident in your work, and that you brought into the electroacoustic sphere where it hasn't particularly been a feature.
Well, that's an interesting thing about. I had an interesting conversation recently with a guy from Argentina. So, for those of people who don't know my work, it's my first big successful piece is called Red Bird. It's subtitled Political Prisoner's Dream, but it's quite abstracted. So you hear the birds change into machines and animals turn into dogs and all kinds of things. It's a kind of mythical thing about the freedom, industrialization, or tyranny, but it's not explicit. It's not people saying, hey, this political line is this. It's all done in this kind of mythological landscape. And as I got older, I felt that this kind of political message is the sort of thing that appeals only to people who are already convinced. So when Cardew was going around playing East German workers' songs in arts centres, all he did was alienate everybody.
No,
he didn't have any. He had a completely negative political effect. But I discovered recently, I was talking to this guy from Argentina, and he said, well, at the time of the generals, when you couldn't say anything critical at all, you could play a Red Bird on the radio and everybody knew what you meant. So it seems that music can be political, even when it's not very explicitly political, given the right context. So, and I'm interested in politics in a small sense, in that I'm interested in the idea of trying to involve people, not especially music, but in the creative process, the idea that you can actually change the world. You have control over the world. You're not just a factor of production or something. Yeah, someone else's pawn.
Yeah.
So,
you're speaking with a musician friend of mine. We were talking about your output. It's vast, actually. You've got several lifetimes worth of work within different genres, and that's a complete bodies of work. Interesting, you were talking about the social security aspect and the kind of universal income star. I'm working pretty hard. You've certainly grafted, and there's the thing for me that pulls it all together is, I think you touched on it there as well, this idea of sociality, but the voice, the human voice seems to be the sort of central aspect for me.
A lot of
within
it,
all your work.
Yes. Not strictly all. The last big piece was all to do with scientific.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the interesting thing about working with the voice experimentally is that the example I always give is if you play a multiphonic on a clarinet, well, a lot of other clarinet players might think, well, that's very clever, I wonder how that's done. But if you sing a multiphonic, I'll try it. It immediately emotionally affects people because they have a voice. And think, oh, what's happening? Is he in pain?
It's tactile.
Yeah, it's almost tactile. So you have this. It's a little bit like this idea of babies are incredibly good at recognising faces. You show them 2 dots there and 1 dot there, and they see a face. And the human voice is a little bit like that. If you have a digital recording of a voice and without being tactile, you reduce the quality of the recording to the lowest possible state, you can still tell it's a human voice because we have such an attachment to that phenomenon. Yeah.
You filled in a couple of interesting blanks for me in your speech. The chemist background I wasn't aware of. I've been searching for the aromatic bicycle music. There's a list of chemicals in the score.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And I finally found a place that sold the exact chemicals and made a list. And they rang me last week and basically said, well, why should we sell these to you? Are you a chemist? No, I'm an artist. And then kind of like, well, we don't deal with artists. We do people with labs and real chemists. And they basically refused to sell them to me. And I managed to find something else. You mentioned the biplane. The biplane is the one that defeated me. You didn't really have a biplane, did you? But you really had it.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about Hebden Bridge at that time?
Oh, well, it looked much like it does now, except this building wasn't here. Yes, I mean, when I came back to Hebden Bridge, I don't really notice it's changed very much, which is a bit like York, It's been like that since medieval times, in fact Roman times in York. So, I can't say anything about the social atmosphere or anything like that. There might be terrible things or exciting or wonderful things going on in Hebden Bridge I know absolutely nothing about because I don't live here. It's certainly got more, how do we say, hipster?
Yeah.
I mean, you have all these interesting places where I would shop. It wasn't quite the same then. There were lots of good stuff, but it tend to be quite traditional, the things you get. Oh, very good stuff, but it's quite traditional. And now the population has shifted somewhat, I guess. I'm guessing that a lot of people use Hebden Bridge as a commuting place, whereas at that time, I don't think that was the case. I can't be certain, but I have the impression that it wasn't so much well, people commute from York to London now, so what's that about? It's cheaper than living in London. So I guess people commute to Manchester and these things from places in the Pennines here. So I think that's probably changed the social character of the place. But again, as I don't live here, I can't.
I found there's, as you mentioned as well, there's no documentation of the Awake Festival at all, apart from the photos that Trevor has. There's nothing. And from some of the conversations that I've had, it seems like this was actually a very significant moment in the history of our town.
Right.
It was perceived by a few people that I've interviewed as for people who were around, that were teenagers at around that point, that somebody described it to me as being like their version of the Summer of Love. It was kind of 1970 at Hebden Bridge. But it was 67 elsewhere.
Yes.
That there was a changing of the guard, that it was the hippies planting the free flag and saying, we're here now, and the locals need to deal with it.
Yes. Well, I was never a hippie, but I was pretty straight.
Well, I mean, there's different layers of hippies, isn't there? And I'm talking to my own parents, and where I say, were you hippies? They're like, no, we couldn't afford to be hippies. There's a certain, you need to live in South Kent in 1966 to be a hippie, or they're too busy working. But no, there was a very much so kind of back to the land idea. There was people moving in.
That's right.
Squatting houses, doing up their houses.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Claiming squatters' rights.
Yes.
It brought this town back up, from what some of the things they're hearing, that it was dying.
Well, it's because the death of the industry. The same thing happened in Leeds and other places. The old industries that they depended on died. I'm from Leeds, so I can talk about that. It's very strange to me that York is a financial centre and it has Harvey Nichols and all these posh flats down by the river. And I remember as a child, I used to go to the church, which is next to Teckley's brewery, where there was a very strong temperance movement there in the 19th century, and my parents didn't drink and that kind of thing. And now Teckley's has completely surrounded this church, and it's closed. And all the dark ways down by the river, which were sort of smoke encrusted abandoned warehouses are now extremely posh, expensive flats.
Yeah.
So, which is in
Oh,
some ways strange, but in some ways it's good. You know, why have a derelict waterfront? It should be a wonderful place to live. But again, it's changed the character, and I think part of the problem though is that there's now becoming a huge. There are all sorts of difference in. Sorry, I'm talking about Leeds, but it's close.
No, it's
There's always the difference in Leeds between South Leeds, where I came from, and North Leeds, where some of my friends at school came from, in terms of income. But now it's gone like this. You know, they're just incredibly rich people and very poor people. You see. So I've noticed that polarisation. I have no idea whether it's like that in every region.
It's more even.
Yes, yeah. I hope so.
There was, I believe, a large sound system. Again, we spoke briefly before about the idea of, and Trevor was very much saying, well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember all this. I don't really, the myth's great. You know, we like the idea of the myth as much as anything. I was told a few times that there was a big sound system on the hillside.
Yes, it was, what are these, what are they called? Hyperbolic cones, things that you used to get for public, if you were putting on an agricultural festival, or the Yorkshire Show, you'd have these big sort of horn loudspeakers, and that's what we were using, and we were moving them around like this as we sang, until the farmer came out and told us to get up his land. We weren't so good at checking them.
The chicken farm.
The chicken farming. Oh, he has.
It's
we were disturbing his battery chickens.
So we spotted it, and somebody said to me the other day that, this used to be a chicken farm. It's kind of like, oh yeah, brilliant. I think a few people have picked up copies of the score. The maps are fascinating. So I spent weeks wandering around with like GPS, overlaying where certain things are. I mean, like, that's exactly the spot on where things are. I've wandered around some streets I didn't know anything about and never encountered before. It's been a wonderful encounter with my own town. We're taking this idea of the town itself being performative, that somehow we can use what we have here to look at it slightly differently. And I think that's what part of what the score has given me, and I've been able to talk to people about and say, well, just by us being here, we can all take part in this piece. And that kind of, it becomes our set. And just going out of your door, and there's a section of the piece where at 11:30 where we need to make a racket in town.
Yes.
And that's quite difficult now because you talk about the factory bells and industry.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes.
And, all of that stuff's gone.
Yeah.
So we're now trying to push the idea that people can just go out of their houses and hit their car horns. We're using horns, buzzers, bells.
Yes.
And using that kind of group. And almost shifting the industry into people who live here, into the residents.
Yes.
That becomes kind of on us. Again, I seem to be talking in statements rather than questions.
Well, another thing that might be interesting to do with in Hebden Bridge is to use hydrophones in the rivers things. Obviously not for this performance, but it's another aspect of the town which is interesting to somehow capture that. Because you have a lot of interesting problems with water here.
We do. We've had yes. We have
not to mention today.
Problems and opportunities and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
We've several of the people on canal barges have very kindly agreed to take part in our performance as well. I've really taken with this idea that we have this sort of acoustic corridor that runs through the town, and also the historical link as well.
Yes.
You mentioned the black ice cream. There's some really deeper sort of local links. I was wondering if there's any that you brought into this. I was going to ask you about the aromatic bicycle music, because I did wonder, A, it's a great time, and B, why? Why aromatic? Just cause.
Just cause, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, that's fair enough.
We could say we're slightly weird.
The black ice cream, I believe, from talking to Mick. Mick's also, can I have a copy of the, if I ask him for the
Oh, sure,
yeah,
yeah.
I've had some lovely emails off Mick, where, yeah, like you were saying, he wouldn't come up and talk about it.
Okay.
But we were talking about Ballard, that kind of almost dystopia as well at the same time as with Landscape as well. He was saying that the black ice cream comes from a Victorian tradition of dyeing icing black for funeral cakes. This was a Victorian tradition.
I didn't know.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's a wonderful piece, and some of the links run deep. And maybe we should ask some questions before I wander off into a tangent.
I'm speaking. I'm not going to switch it up.
Yeah, should be on.
Okay, I've got quite a loud voice actually. I wanted to bring you back to the vocal score, and I did talk briefly to you.
Yes.
I'm going to make a statement like Julian, as well as maybe a question. And the statement is that what we found in the quartet is that we've all, although two of us I think have fans of contemporary and experimental music in particular. One of us sings for the Huddersfield Choral Society and therefore is usual to a classical score.
Yes.
I sing both with a score and without in two different groupings. And so the first thing we had to get used to was having no time signature.
Yes.
Just a 4-minute time span, which we divided up mathematically into minutes. But the lovely thing that we have found and discovered in sections 1 and 3 is that singing section 1 backwards, which is section 3, we've discovered whole new harmonies that weren't there when we sang section 1.
Yes.
So it's not just an exact vertical homophonic repetition, but in reverse. And I think each time we sing it, there are some different wonderful chords in there, some very crunchy ones as well. So it is really it's becoming more magnificent in my eyes, although this is strange territory for me.
Yes.
I wondered, when you write a piece and you engage musicians to perform it, do you find they have to go through this process, or have you got musicians who are quite accustomed to the way you write scores?
Well, I tend to work with musicians. This is a relatively simple score for me. Perhaps we shouldn't, but if you look at the score of Anti-Kratos, you probably run a mile, because it doesn't have any, it does have tiny bits of staff notation, and most of it is incredibly complicated diagrams, but it's not simply graphic. They actually mean go.
How do you write that?
Well, you have to look at the score. And for that you need musicians who, they're used to that kind of thing. They look at the film, oh God, what's this? But they'll do it.
Well,
but I also do things with amateurs and with game sessions and all kinds of things. So I'm interested in more open forms where you present people with fairly simple materials out of which they can make quite surprising things. So I have a kind of split personality. It's like the electroacoustic music nerd on the computer, writing computer software on this side, and then the free improviser on this side. It's a strange combination of nerdiness and anarchy.
It's wonderful. And section 2 is a bit more graphic, a bit more complicated, and that's a bit getting used to, but we are getting there.
Yeah, great.
So, anyway, thank you for that.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I think you may have touched on it, but to what extent is there scope for community involvement and improvisation within your production?
in this project,
Yeah, I'm general.
oh, well, okay, in this project probably none, except it's been done by the community, which is, you know, so they're automatically involved. But in the original, it was very much, I think, I'm being self-critical here, it was supposed to be about the community, but really it was quite external. It was but at least it was, at least you could hear it. It wasn't in some concert hall in Leeds or something, which you wouldn't want to go to anyway. It was happening. But the problem with that is if you didn't like it, you had to lump it. But that's why I began to orientate more towards this musical game structure. So when we did this piece on the beach in Cleveland, Blackpool again wouldn't have us, Cleveland and Bispham and Southport, people were drawn in by taking part in these musical games. And I've done strange events like Spanner, where this is something that happens probably at some kind of conference, and you're sent a list, and it says, oh, bring a white loaf, a bag of nails, 3 recordings of Goldfish. Well, no, that's a joke, but things. And you turn up, and in your group you've got this arbitrary collection of things. Then you give them some crazy instructions like make an opera in the form of a Western, which is a minuet. And you think, what? But you have to use all these materials. And some people just go, this is stupid. But
whereas for me, that's freedom.
Often you get fantastic things out of this, because how on earth do you interpret this? And people come up with absolutely amazing things. I don't know what they're going to do. And it's that kind of engaging people's imaginations.
Yeah.
But occasionally you get a group in which there's one person who thinks, oh, this is brilliant, it's a complete waste of time. I often do these workshops with teachers, and if you've got a group with one person like that, it can be destructive. So you had to kind of sort of edge them to one side and have a discussion with them while the others got them doing it. So people match.
Related to that, have you ever worked in primary school?
Oh yes, yes.
I've been in primary schools, and I'm there again tomorrow for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But for Stubbins, Central Street, Hebden Broyd, Old Town, doing workshops with this book.
Yes, I do.
Purposefully, solely just using this book from, was it 1972?
In fact, I've been in primary schools with taking in
These
samplers. So you go in and you say, you have a microphone, and you say, well, we're going to record some sounds. And what should we say? And people think of very ordinary to begin with, and we say, well, let's try jangling those keys. And you record it, and then on the sampler you play on the bottom note, and these keys go, and young kids are absolutely amazed. And the nice thing is that kids up to the age of about 10 are really open to all sorts of exciting things. Through the age of 13, there's only one band in the entire world that makes any kind of music that means anything. And then hopefully they grow out of that. Some people never grow out of it, unfortunately. But so primary school is good. So it's more challenging in the middle of teens, but I've worked a lot in secondary schools as well. Also worked with senior citizens. Is that what we call ourselves now? Yeah.
Reactions into the first performance, the Chicken Farmer and the Summer of Love response.
Yeah.
Are there any other accounts? For instance, the Hebden Times wrote up just about everything that happened at that time. So, is there any report in the Hebden Times?
not that we've been able to find so far.
I have a little newsletter.
There's a rumour that the Courier took some photos and currently they are unable to locate them.
I've got a photograph of the black ice cream, kids with black ice cream.
That's from the Daily Express.
Oh right, okay.
That's yes. That's
Yes.
one of Mick sent me that.
Yes.
Yes. He was trying to. he was talking about trying to patent it at the time. He was like, no, just couldn't be bothered, it was too much. Like, that's a good idea, briefly. Yeah, it's interesting with newspapers these days, there are, like many things, they're completely hollowed out. They barely exist. No, you get your own photographer, you write your own copy, and yeah, it seems a terrible shame that what a loss as a skill set.
Yes.
I have two questions for you. The first one, I find it quite interesting that you're in a place doing a performance yet record it. Have you got any views on just letting stuff happen? Sorry, you're in a place but you're taking recordings of the events as they happen. Have you got any strong views on not recording things and just allowing it in the moment? Which seems to be, I've been to quite a few gigs recently, there's a bit of a movement of don't record, don't take photographs, allow it to happen, which resonated a bit with the thinking around actually you've got a performance in a place that's happening at a specific moment in time.
Yes.
But for me, part of the excitement about Sunday is that it's not recorded and it's ethereal and disappears.
I think that was the idea at the time, but it became de rigueur to record these things. I mean, I'm a composer, so I write things down. So that was quite natural to me. And I also now work in electroacoustic music, where what you make in the recording is what you get. That's it. But with my free improvisation, it's just something that happens like that. So a lot of people come to them because other people have recorded them on their mobile phones, and it gets around on YouTube. Apparently, I don't do social media, but apparently I'm well known on social media, and so people come to gigs. So it depends whether you're talking about whether it's good for the performers or whether it's good for the audience.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? You can see both sides. There's the idea. I remember my wife and I going to a nightclub a few years ago, and it was nearly the last nightclub we ever went to because everybody there, well, as well as being 20 years younger than us, was looking at the whole thing through their phone. And it everywhere, and thankfully that moment seems to slightly have passed actually in club culture. But it was horrifying actually. It is the dislocation between and something very much we've been doing in the workshops actually, talking about being there, listening as a skill to pull you into the moment, to not be off somewhere, so not thinking about what this is going to look like to your friends, to just exist, where you are, and actually that is one of the for me the whole point of a lot of these exercises, as well as they're games and it's fun, but actually there's something sort of something that we're trying to achieve under that.
Yes, often do a listening. Start a session with, you might do this kind of movement warm-ups, then you get everybody to lie down and just listen and ask people what they hear. And, suddenly people hear things that they weren't aware of in the environment because something that's there all the time, like traffic, and so you learn to filter them out. But other things you're just not listening for, like birdsong or whatever it is.
There's no spec birdsong.
A supplemental, unrelated question. I was really interested that you spoke about universal wage and social issues. I spend my day jobs in artificial intelligence and robotics and looking at social issues and the decline of industry. As an artist, do you think that's an opportunity if the utopian of leisure society comes back? Do you think that's good for art?
It depends whether I'm in a good mood or a bad mood. If I'm in a good mood, I think it's good that people don't feel they have to spend. Most people spend their lives working at something which they would, if they had any choice, they wouldn't be doing it. I'm thinking about my own parents. My dad really didn't want to paint tractors, but he didn't have any choice. But some people have wonderful jobs. I mean, I enjoy my job, it's fantastic, and that's why I'm not retired from it. It's great. But I think the majority of the population are doing something because they need the money, and they get to they get along with it. I didn't get to like it, but they wouldn't have chosen to do it. And so having leisure There's this problem. If you just been in the United States, where people have 2 weeks holiday a year, so when they have leisure, it's like they go gambling and go to shows, things like that. It's kind of the opposite of work. But leisure is something else. You don't have to work, therefore you can pursue something else seriously that you want to do. You're not being paid for it. And whether it could be fishing, fine. I think of that as the working man's philosophical moment. You don't fish to fish, you fish to think. That's what it's for. But you might get interested in the arts, you might get interested in heavy metal, or you might get interested in bullets. I won't make a judgment about that, but you have an opportunity to go into things in depth. Or it might be embroidery, it might be anything. Things that you would just like to absorb your time. Social attitudes to leisure would have to change, because at the moment, the pressure on leisure is it has to be a gas and fun, let's get totally pissed, or let's do whatever, because we're out of work, we're free. When it's a lot of your time, it's something completely different. And changing that mentality might be more difficult than getting rid of the jobs in the first place.
Any more questions on the floor? Well, in that case, can I just say a massive thank you to Trevor for creating this wonderful work that we are going to be performing on Sunday, to Julian for helping to realise this in 2018, and thank you to all of you for coming, and I very much hope you'll join us on Sunday. Unfortunately, Trevor can't join us on Sunday, but we've been delighted to hear from you tonight.
I will join you for some of it, but I'll have to leave early, unfortunately, for the best bit, because I'm off to Cyprus.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.